Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of Meyerside Chats. What a day. Today we have Shannon Watson with us. Very excited to chat with Shannon. We had a wonderful conversation about 2 days ago, and we are carrying it forward to today to bring you all the best of our conversation. Shannon has 20 plus years of experience in electoral politics, advising candidates and working on campaigns on both sides of the aisle in Kansas, Colorado, Minnesota, and she has a wonderful perspective on how government works, on how politics works, and how to bring us back towards center and have reasonable conversations. Shannon, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to see you again.
You too.
Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation the other day and very excited to now share it with the world.
Awesome.
And tell me a little bit. Why don't we jump right into just majority in the middle? It says a lot. I think it says what you're thinking. But tell me a little bit about that? How'd you get into it? And what are you working on right now that you're real excited about?
Okay, so Majority in the Middle is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and we work to equip and empower civility and good civic and political engagement. And we do that by creating space, sometimes metaphorical space and sometimes actual literal spaces, for people to come together, no matter sort of what their personal political persuasion is, left, right, center, not, whatever. Anybody who comes to our table in good faith, we have a spot for them. We try to elevate the conduct of people who are sort of acting like we want to see politicians conduct themselves. And we do that by, using our platform and then also encouraging traditional media organizations to highlight their work and not just have all the spotlight on the people who are representing all the division. And then we also work on a thing that we call structural partisanship, which is the rules, customs, and sometimes even physical infrastructure that divides people and keeps them divided primarily in legislative settings. So we have a lot going on. We just, in September, released our third State of Bipartisanship report, which is an analysis of all of the bills that are heard here in Minnesota and the partisan authoring of those bills. The first one, we sort of accidentally got into this work, but the very first report showed a lot of the hidden bipartisanship that was happening when people were coming together and authoring bills that wasn't showing up at the end of the session when everything was getting voted on party line votes. So we got to release that, and we did a little statewide tour with elected officials and did a bunch of press conferences around the state, tried to make that coverage a little more relevant for different communities. And yeah, we're about to have our Purple Party, which is a thing that we do every year. The second Saturday after Election Day, we have a party. No matter who wins, no matter who loses, everybody is welcome. Generally, some people wait until after the outcome of elections to say if they really wanted to come to a party or not. But we do that, and that's a really, really fun thing to do. So we're getting ready for that on November 15th.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, let's jump into one of the things you mentioned and we talked about earlier, which is this structural partisanship and some of the things that get in the way, even within their own caucus. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So what are some of the things that you've noticed that get in the way, perhaps that the public doesn't know, or common knowledge about how things work in that regard in finally getting something executed at the legislative level?
Yeah. Well, Minnesota is a really interesting place for a study of bipartisanship and sort of an analysis of what are those things that are getting in the way, because all kinds of Americans say, oh, well, we want our elected officials to get along, and people campaign the first time and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to work across the aisle. And then those things seem to not happen. And so I did a lot of research going into this, and it turned out I'd been noodling on the idea for about 15 years before we launched in 2020. But one of the things that I heard over and over from legislators was that the opposition to working across the aisle generally doesn't come from the other side of the aisle. It comes from your own caucus. There's some some sort of like good-hearted, and then some like really organizational barriers put up, because generally leadership wants the caucus to stick together and wants everybody to toe the party line. And so sometimes they need incentives to be brave, do that brave thing, and work with somebody across the aisle on something that their entire caucus may not entirely agree with. So in Minnesota this year, we sort of accidentally wound up with an opportunity to have a lot of bipartisanship, because our House of Representatives, it's House of Representatives in Minnesota, in California, it's the Assembly. Our House of Representatives is tied with 67 members in the Democrats and 67 members in the Republicans. And so you need, constitutionally, 68 votes for anything to pass, which means you've got to have bipartisanship on everything that goes through, which in a good way means there are a lot of people who are getting an opportunity to work with members of the other party in ways that they haven't ever had to. It's also giving a lot of cover for people who really are interested in working across the aisle. It's not because they want to or because they're brave. It's because they have to. And that gives them a little cover with constituents who might otherwise be a little irritated about that.
Yeah. What and when we say working across the aisle, what does it specifically mean for a Republican to support something that's typically not supported? What are the barriers that are preventing that person from supporting, whether it's internal or external? What are some of the real things that happen in reality?
Yeah. There's a couple. The first one is that, and most people don't understand this until you get, you really inner workings of a legislative body. The primary organizing situation is that, people think, okay, you've got a House, you got a Senate, or you got an Assembly and a Senate, and you've got the different districts and you've got the parties and whatever. The main organizing factions are the caucuses. So the House Republican Caucus and the House in Minnesota, the Democratic Party is actually the Democrat Farmer Labor Party. So if I say DFL, that's what that is. That's the Democratic Party in Minnesota. So it's like the House DFL Caucus and the House, the Senate DFL Caucus and the Senate Republican Caucus. Those four very much sort of act like independent organizations. They have their own structures, they have their own seniority, they have their own leadership, they have their own staff. So sometimes it is Democrats versus Republicans, and sometimes it's the House versus the Senate. And actually that came up a lot this year, because as much as people expected those 67 people to fight against the other 67 people, at the end of the day, they really had to come together and be team House against the Senate to try to advance what they wanted. So there's that. There's also one of the biggest barriers to working across the aisle that I have heard from legislators is their constituents, and is primarily the really active constituents, the party, sometimes party elders, but party activists, who are the ones that show up and do the endorsements. And so they have a really hard time. Most of the party endorsements for legislative seats, like in 2026, every single one of our legislators is on the ballot. The House is elected every 2 years. Our Senate is elected 4 years, and 2 years, which has to do with redistricting. But this is one of those years where everybody is on the ballot. And so they will all have to go through endorsing conventions in late winter, early spring. So February, March, April, in there somewhere, which means their primary audience for a few months is those people who have votes in the party caucuses about it, whether they're going to get the endorsement or not. And as you can imagine, the language that you use and the opinions and the priorities of 200 very committed party activists is probably different than the general population or your constituents who do not share that party affiliation. So
I don't know if the right term for those folks. I don't know if the right term for these particular folks, I think it may be partially squeaky wheel is usually a good term to describe
Yeah.
people that like continue to do the thing and have the loudest voice and push on the issue.
Right.
Is squeaky wheel a good term to describe these types
I
of
think
individuals?
it's a good term, and they're the ones that have the power. They are delegates to the endorsing convention. If you don't get the endorsement, you still do have the option to go to a primary to get that party spot on the ballot in November. But a lot of people don't have the desire or don't have the resources to run against somebody else who may have gotten the endorsement. All the way until our primary elections aren't until August, which is a thing that I think universally nobody likes, because in August, the only thing that people in Minnesota are doing is trying to be outside because it's one of the months that we can. So it takes a lot. It takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of grit to run a primary contest. And I will tell, there is not a single legislator that I know who is more afraid of a challenger across the aisle, of the other party, than they are a primary kind of candidate, primary and challenger, because those are much harder races to run for most people.
And when you say harder, you just mean the chances of winning.
Well, and just it means that you have to sort of retreat to the fringes with your language and with what you're trying to do. And
Right.
so in some districts, it's not as big of a deal as okay, so I live in Minneapolis, which is a very sort of blue city. That doesn't mean that, moderates and Republicans don't live here. It's just we're outnumbered by a lot. So the district that I used to live in, my House member had the DFL endorsement, Democratic endorsement, ran unopposed 2 years ago, and she got 93% of the vote. She had no opponent whose name was on the ballot, and yet 7% of the people in the district who voted wrote somebody else in or didn't vote for her. It goes to show, even in the districts that are super red or super blue, every elected official has constituents that they are supposed to represent who didn't vote for them. But it's
Sure.
right. It's easier to, in districts like that where 90% of the people are with you. Most of the time, the real contest is the primary. If you have multiple candidates from one party, and this could be the same as in Greater Minnesota, where you get from those deep red districts. Whoever gets through the primary is probably going to skate against their opposite party opponent, if they even have one. So that's where it gets a little more difficult, because you have to play to that particular audience, and sometimes people are more than happy to. Maybe that's why they got into politics. They're deep red or deep blue, and that's what they want to do. But some, particularly the ones that live in the more purple districts, have a harder time of that, because they risk alienating the people who aren't those party delegates.
Right. Well, it also sounds like a bit of an activation energy issue, right? Like once you have the momentum, it's a lot easier and people know you, but getting from 0 to 1 is hard, right? Like if you don't have a community or an audience or a following, and you're like, I have good ideas, well, that's great, but this person is being listened to by 250,000 people and you're being listened to by none. So how do you get in just from an awareness standpoint, a branding awareness standpoint, how do you do that? And it's really hard. And unfortunately, I know even in California, for example, you get access once you are in the Senate or Assembly to a massive voter registration email list.
Yeah.
Like in the Senate, it's like, a 250,000 or 500,000. It depends on certain things, but it's massive. So then you're like, okay, how do you even start to do that unless you have already built that somehow?
Right.
It's just an audience. At some point, it's an audience and branding exercise.
Absolutely.
So the first step is like, okay, you have an idea. Oh, you want to run? Great. How are you going to go from 0 to 1?
Yeah.
These are the people
who
are
hard.
One. This is what they're doing. This is what they have.
It's interesting. You mentioned in my bio, I worked for political campaigns for a really long time, and that was either as a volunteer or as a paid staff. And then I got out of that, and I used to do a thing that I called pre-campaign consulting. And that was, I would work with people who were interested in running for office at some point, like not right then. So this wasn't how do you door knock or how do you fundraise or how do you create a message or, what do you need to know about yard signs? Way less than more people want to know about yard signs. You need to know way less about yard signs. But what we would work on is, becoming known in your community. If you are looking for an endorsement, not having the first time you ever show up to one of those precinct meetings being when you're trying to get the endorsement. No, you need to go a couple of years ahead of time. Exactly to your point, to start building that audience. And that's one of the ways that is really helpful for candidates to look at. Sometimes even like, you got to run multiple times. Your first race, something like it. There's I can't find the stat, but it's something like 97% of first-time candidates lose. Like 97% of first-time candidates lose.
Even in local elections.
Absolutely,
Even
yeah.
Yeah.
And that could be really daunting, especially if first-time candidates have a bad experience running and losing. I mean, you could run and lose and still have a good experience if you frame it up the right way. And if like the reason that you lose isn't sort of your fault, or something that you didn't know that trips you up. So I used to do that, and that was really fun because it gave us an opportunity to say, who are your constituencies? Who is your network? Who do you need to know? Where are the places you need to know? And that actually, I think, helped a lot. Because that's the thing. If a candidate runs and doesn't win and never runs again, like that can be a huge swing and a miss for some communities, especially because the other piece about first-time candidates usually have a lot of people around them for whom it's also their first experience of electoral politics. And if the candidate has a bad experience and their family has a bad experience and their neighbors have a bad experience, then that just drives people further and further away.
Yeah. Well, for sure. And you're also putting your entire life under a microscope. So, and your family too. And now with political violence and the stuff going on, it's quite scary to say, let me enter that game. It's added yet another barrier to entry, not just activation energy and building a community, having better ideas, motivating people to believe in you, believing your ideas are better than other people's, that you have the fixes, right? Well, now you have to worry about political violence. If you get too big, then, are your ideas a little too much for some crazy people? And that adds, unfortunately, another barrier to entry. What do you think where are we right now in terms of like the type of people? So given the 97% statistic that you've mentioned, given how hard it is with activation energy to get from 0 to 1 to even be considered in a race like that.
Right.
Right. Especially at the state level. I mean, even at local levels, it's challenging. So what do we need to do to overcome these things, plus the political violence, the fears of getting involved, so the right people can bubble up and start getting elected? Because right now, there's such a small number of people who fit into this mold. It's like a certain type and style of person. It's not the engineers and the entrepreneurs quite as much.
That's a really high. Elected office also doesn't pay very well, and none of us actually have free time. I mean, I don't know a single person who just, at the end of the day sits and stares at the wall for an hour and doesn't move. Like, we're all doing things with our time. And so part of the challenge is figuring out what trade-offs there's going to be. Are you going to be stepping away from work? Are you going to be stepping away from your family? We have made serving in electoral office in this country, like, really, really unpleasant. And so I think, I wish I had a silver bullet, but there's really like 14 or 15 things that we can probably do. I think the first one is having a little more support, a little more respect for people who are serving in office. The social media comments that they have to deal with and the harassment, that's got to stop. And like, I know a guy who has served in office and he's running for another office. And when people send him nasty emails, he writes them back and says, thank you for your email. Let's go to coffee and talk about this. And of course, almost nobody takes him up on it because they don't actually want to have a conversation. They want to, send a nastygram to somebody that they don't know And yeah, I mean, I think there's got to be something to be said about like our like everybody's sort of mental health threshold.
Yeah.
like
These
we're all,
keyboard warriors and
yeah.
these keyboard warrior type people. Yeah.
Well, and we're all very angry and we're all very scared. And it seems like a lot of this all the time. And we want to figure out who to point that at and who to sort of do harm to. And we're kind of doing it to each other, which is just
Yeah.
ramping it up more. So anyways, a little more kindness on social media. Another thing is there are, in my mind, there are two different kinds of people who run for office. People who are more of an activist or people who are more of an analyst. I used to say activist and judge, but analyst is actually a better sort of term for this. So activists are running for office because they have the solution to a problem or they have something that they very much care about, whether that is homelessness or immigration or, the taxes, their property taxes or their kids' school or whatever. They come in, they have either volunteered with an advocacy organization or they've been involved in that in some way. And they bring those experiences and those sort of solutions to the table. Like that's their reason for running for office. I know how to fix this problem. I want to fix this problem. Like, here I come. I have found there's a lot of advocacy organizations who are really pushing their supporters and sometimes their staff to run for office. That is one way to get from 0 to 1 is to have an organization like that behind you. But so that has people with a particular mindset to elected office. The challenge is once they get elected, then they have to make decisions. And if you come in with your solution in mind, with your mind made up, with all of your statistics and stuff, and you're not really interested in the conversation, you're like, I have this solution, then that makes it much harder to negotiate or deal with, your other elected officials. An analyst or like a juror are the people who say, we've got a challenge. I want to come help, but I don't necessarily have a solution in mind. Like, you go and you sit on a jury and the jury is presented with evidence and the situation. And then they have to get together with the other jurors and make a decision. Those people generally, they don't know as much about one thing. They generally know a lot more about a lot of little things, and they have a very open mind, which means they generally work more slowly than the activists like. And there are activists and jurors on both sides. You can have right or left. It doesn't really matter. Old and young doesn't really matter. But when you get those two kinds of elected officials, you get them sort of in the same space, then they butt heads, even if they agree on things, just based on how they want to approach the job. It's like, I want to enact this solution, or let's talk about the options to this solution. We may get to yours, but that's one of the things. And so that's one of the reasons that I always try to look for people who are more like jurors than activists. Because activists have a place in democracy, but the more jurors that you have, the more likely you are going to find consensus on issues, and have people who are willing to compromise and collaborate and not necessarily just get thumbs up for the thing that they came in with.
I love that. We need to have an index, the juror to activist index.
Right? Wouldn't that be fun?
Right. And what should it be? 50-50? Should it be 75%? What you're suggesting, I think, and I've something I've thought about for a long time is, why are people not studying political philosophy?
Because it's dull.
I mean, but there's brilliant people,
True.
John Locke and Thomas Paine, and all these people who have thought through because it's not a science.
Right.
How to create...
It's an art. Yeah.
It's an art. It's how to create a perfect society has not been discovered yet. We've been working on it for thousands of years. Yeah. No one's figured it out. Plato had great ideas. Thought he knew what he was, right? We've had to go through iterations of what ultimately is the most utilitarian approach.
Yeah.
Where most people can be most happy with the best quality of life most often. And at the moment, it's the best it's ever been, given all the problems.
Yeah.
we're still not, we're not hitting people with clubs. 1 out of 3 people aren't dying by, because they have
Right.
different eyebrows than you when they're blindsided with a big, wooden club.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it
You know
used to be like.
Actually,
It's like
that would be really fun. A John Locke on TikTok channel explaining political philosophy in 30 seconds or less.
yeah. And you know what? There's actually a lot of good content. If people were more philosophical, and I think that aligns with your juror comment.
Yeah.
Because I think what you're suggesting is, can you weigh out pros and cons and see right? So, and a philosopher is essentially someone who does that well without taking a large emotional investment on either side. They can
Right.
weigh them out objectively. And a juror is supposed to be able to do that.
Supposed
And
to
they
be able to
study
do-
philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. And in practice, the jurors generally have a little more comfort with ambiguity, and they bring more voices to the table, actually, because it's not that the person who's coming in has to be more
It's a great
represented.
line.
But the one place where activists really do excel is in an attention economy. Like, an activist can explain their thing to you in 30 seconds.
Right.
A juror has a really hard time to do that. So we are very much in an attention economy, and elected officials have had to be. It's really hard to, it's the next 10 words thing from West Wing. What are the next 10 words? Like, 10 words is great. What are the next 10 words? Tell me the next 10. I am an enormous fan of everything Aaron Sorkin, by the way. A lot of us are. I actually used to have a sticky note. This is a sidebar. I used to have a sticky note on my monitor, and I do a lot of writing. And the sticky note said, "What would Aaron Sorkin write?" And after a couple years, I had to take it down because I realized it was so much pressure. I wasn't getting anything done.
A little too hard.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
That's
so
funny.
like, activists work really well in the attention economy, and so they have a much better embrace of how we're doing communication these days. And so that gives them a little extra lift in that getting from 0 to 1 problem.
I see. Yeah, they
Yeah.
excel in the attention economy and the rage bait and the
Yeah.
in the clickbait and the how to
Right. And distilling it down to something really simple. And,
Yeah.
if you don't like my
Yeah.
thing, you are a terrible person. And
Yep.
here's why.
Right.
Yeah.
What? Click advertising dollars.
Mhm.
So that's an unfortunate reality,
It is.
because it's taking the emotional, impulsive, often even whimsical mentality and behavior of what people feel in the moment without considering implications, consequences, and perspective, and it throws it at the top of the list. And I'm glad there's at least some recognition that this is happening, and it seems like people know. If you tell them this, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, of course," but they're the first ones to participate in it. So it's very
Right.
And they're, well, let's just play the game, and some people don't want to play that game. And if you play, how do you play that game in a way that is not just doing, clickbait type stuff? But you said something really interesting. You said comfort with ambiguity.
Yeah.
This is you have to do a lot of self-work, right? To be able to feel comfortable in ambiguous spaces, especially ones that are where there's fear can come up, and you've got past traumas or whatever triggers you to get real invested in this thing.
Yes.
How do you put that aside and say, "Oh man, wait a second, 150 million people think differently than me on this"? Even with all of that, how do you suppress those things so that you can be comfortable in ambiguity and embrace a rational conversation?
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the places where, I tell people all the time that if they want better political I don't like the people on my ballot. Okay, then either run for office yourself, or that you may not be the best person on the ballot, but think of the best person you know. Like, who is the best person you know? And encourage them to run for office. And 99 times out of 100, they will laugh at you because they will be like, "I don't want any part of that."
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's the people who are, just kind of the best people, the smartest, the most articulate, the most compassionate, the most thoughtful, the ones who have a breadth and depth of life experience that gives them an interesting perspective. And those are not always the people who talk the most or talk the loudest. Actually, they're often not. The person who's talking the most or the person who's talking the loudest. It's probably not. And I say that as somebody who talks a lot and talks pretty loud.
Well, I think there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons, and look, I find myself thinking about this a lot also, where you want to reply to something and say something, and then you go, what are the chances you're going to convince someone of your argument on a thread, you think that, and you're going to spend the time to convince people of your idea? Like when you say we've had this, is when you have something to communicate, do you communicate via SMS? Do you communicate via email? Is it a phone call? All that. Yeah. And sometimes in the business world or in anywhere, you have to say, I don't think I'm going to send that in an email. I think that's a phone call, right?
I had that phone call right before I got on the thing. Yeah, I did. I have somebody call me because she was like, I don't want to put this in writing. Cool.
Right. They've taken all the worst things that are not meant for text messages, and they've put it in hateful short messaging.
Yeah.
Which is not where it belongs to get to the bottom of points. And no one is going to be like, oh man, you're so right. And all the 1,000 people who've commented on this are now going to agree with you and change their perspective. You may get a few thumbs up. You may get a couple people go, yeah. But you're not going to shift anything on that thread with that comment, with your long, thoughtful response.
And research goes to show that when people post on social media and they have arguments on social media, it almost never changes anybody else's mind. But what it does is it reinforces your position in your own mind. So it shoves you further down your rabbit hole.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd have to imagine it's so much more weighted in the way that you're talking about than the number of people you think it affected. So it's not a good use of time or your brain power or intellect. You're better off spending time with your kids, traveling, reading a book you like, and perhaps writing something that can be shared in a much different way, more effectively. But that comment on social, people are going to stop. Yeah. It's stop.
It's interesting. I've always been the person to read the comments, and I know the rule is don't read the comments. Comments that I know are not coming from bots, I generally still read. I still read.
Yeah.
Because the comments that people will put on moderated forums, it may not be super nuanced, but those are what people really think. And the best way to make sure that you're not going to solve a problem is to ignore half of the people who are engaged in a problem. And not know, the first step to solving any problem is acknowledging that there is one. And the first step to overcoming any argument is to find out that there is one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, just first noticing.
Yeah, absolutely. Noticing and listening and then not immediately discounting. Like, that person said that thing because they are insert whatever here.
A good test and could be sometimes take the hardest possible issue. Gun control, abortion, any of these top line things, which in my opinion, there's not a right answer for. Because if there was, it's a philosophical problem, not an obvious scientific answer. And if things that are divided 50-50, it's not like there's dumb people on one side and smart people on the other side. There's obviously real intellectual rationale and concern that for any of these sides, when things are divided 50-50, you didn't win if you won by 51%.
Absolutely.
You didn't really win.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm in support. When we talk about federal government, which I don't talk about very often, but the 60 votes you need in the Senate, I think that's great. Because still, that's not an overwhelming majority, but that's more than just one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny to think about. It's yes, we won. It's sort of a zero-sum game.
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
Okay.
We could do a whole hour on zero-sum games.
Oh, we won the abortion thing this time. It's sort of a zero-sum game.
Very rarely did you win permanently.
Exactly. And it's just too complicated for people to think that there's a right answer. And anytime anyone comes up and is like, oh, I can solve the health insurance problem so easily. All you have to do is
Yeah.
this one thing. And it's like, wow, you should run for office and make that happen because all these very smart people have not figured out that brilliant
Right.
5-minute solution to a 100-year-old problem.
And that's the thing. I mean, we're left, like, the easy stuff is done. We are left with the hard stuff. You mentioned guns.
Yeah, that's right.
And a brilliant, brilliant friend of mine catalyzed for me the gun argument several years ago. So she is a woman. She is a gun owner. She carries a gun. She has a permit to carry, a concealed carry permit. And she was going to school, and the campus had a no guns on campus policy. And so one of the things that she wanted to do is she wanted the school to change that, because she wanted to have her gun with her, as she does most of the time. And her thing was that the challenge with guns is that her gun makes her feel safe. And we come into a problem when her gun makes me feel unsafe. Like, that's the thing. Her gun makes her feel safe. Her gun makes me feel unsafe. Actually, her gun doesn't make me feel unsafe, but, whatever. Like, we're talking beyond just whose feeling of safety are we going to lean into and hold up.
Yeah.
But also, when you're talking about something that's fear-based, that's not the rational part of your brain. That's the limbic part of your brain. That's the reptilian, the oldest part. And to your point, you can't rationalize your way out of fear. So I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, one of the fundamental philosophical arguments of why it's complicated. There's a lot of them, I think.
And that's one of the reasons that we use that tactic. And I say we, as people in the, sort of politics industry, we use the tactics to make, very dry policy considerations into something that people are going to have an emotional reaction to. Because then you can't rationalize your way out of that if they are afraid of whatever it is that you're trying to promote or trying to stop. Like, that's easy. You just got now the next part is you just have to keep them afraid or angry to do what you want.
Right. So there's so many human psychology underlying problems with this, and fear-based emotional responses to things, and a sense of self-purpose, and like why people even engage in the first place. Like, well, you're not going to do anything about it. Why are you even read something else? It's just the craziest thing. I've had this conversation with way too many friends and family. Like, all you're doing is, there's so much beauty in the world. Go enjoy. If you can't, was it Maya Angelou, this famous quote? I forget who said, if you don't like it, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude.
Yeah, something like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you're going to spend all this time hating. You're not doing anything. You're going to just go work on your business and read something nice, and go read books about art and beauty and music and enjoy life. You're so frustrated and you're so privileged, and you feel bad that you're privileged to live in America in the top 1% of people in West Los Angeles and have everything, and you don't have to worry about hot water or plumbing or anything like that. You got all this incredible, the food is always fine, the water's always fine. Yeah. Everything's at your doorstep, and all you want to do is go out and hate things that you're not going to do anything about. Yeah. I don't get that mentality.
And some of us push the message that if you're, like the thing, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. I hate that. Like, stop trying to wind everybody up, even though that's the entire point of your thing, is winding everybody up. So, yeah.
All right, so let's bring it back. Let's bring it back a little to majority in the middle. I want to get a little bit more about, so maybe the most exciting thing you're working on right now, and let's encapsulate this conversation a little bit around about what you're doing right now in your organization to make some of these improvements in our society.
Yeah. So one of the things that we are working on, we've got this whole body of work that is just waiting to get off the ground. It is formulated. It's just waiting to get off the ground. But it is a focus on nonpartisan local official. So, like, the legislature and the Congress, those are partisan roles. In Minnesota, every local elected office So that's county commissioner, city council, mayor, school board, park board, township supervisor, or whatever. Those are all legally nonpartisan offices. They're not always functionally nonpartisan offices, but they're legally nonpartisan offices. And so we have spent the last couple of years talking with our friends and doing research and trying to figure out, how do we keep the nonpartisan offices nonpartisan? How do we create community around nonpartisan offices and people who hold them so that, they have a community? It's really hard to say no to an endorsement or to being a member of a party because so many things come along with that. And then also Minnesota's got, I don't know if it's a significant problem, but it depends on who you talk to and who's using it, but sort of a rural-urban divide. And so
I think that's the whole country.
Right, probably.
Yeah.
We have been convening some Zoom groups. It used to be that we would convene a group of elected officials for whatever reason, and we would spend the first half of the call talking about whatever we had intended to talk about. And then we spent the other half of the call when they would basically be having a support group meeting and talking about zoning or pickleball or how do you deal with the frequent flyer constituents who show up at every meeting and they always have a comment about something on the agenda, like how do you respectfully deal with them? And so we put together this whole thing that is basically just that. It's the second half of the meeting, and created these cohorts of some people who are in rural areas, some are in suburban, some are in urban, and trying to mix those up so people can find commonalities and then sort of like ideas and things that they might have not thought of because it hadn't applied to them yet, or they can exchange information. So that has been a really cool thing to watch. And then we've got, a bunch of other work that is getting ready to jump off, but it's all based on that and creating those relationships. And that's
so the goal is to create cities should be nonpartisan.
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
Yeah. Well, I mean, legally, those offices are, because they're not meant to be. There's no such thing as a DFL or a Republican pothole.
Right. But what makes city partisan?
When local party units start doing endorsements and candidates feel like they need to carry that banner, there are some places in Minnesota where the party endorsement is a big thing.
You mean the city council, the people in the city council, for example, let's just say they're all Democrat.
Right.
Which in many California cities, they are. They're just all, right?
Right.
Okay. So now you have, so you're suggesting that if we remove the endorsements, which is hard to do, like you said, from the Democratic Party's endorsement of this candidate for this position. And so, let's say this. So let's say that's the hard problem is to prevent them taking money for their campaign from these political parties.
Mm-hmm.
How can we make sure that the cities themselves, operated and run by the city manager, for example, which is separate than the political body of the council, kind of like a board of directors and a CEO?
Right, exactly.
How do we make sure, because there's two versions of that. One is, let's make sure all the candidates are nonpartisan. The other is, how do you make sure the city is making sure that those candidates, if they are getting that money, are not pushing political issues that could make them come off as partisan?
Right. Well, and that's a good question. And the bigger problem from our perspective is there is some mission creep when, they take on issues that that's probably not their focus, or they bring a partisan sort of lens to what's on the city council agenda. But also that just gives another layer of, my city councilor isn't the same as me. And so that creates a divide. And that's an artificial divide that still in Minnesota, in a lot of places, it doesn't exist. There are a couple of cities where it's a big thing. And one of the things that we were hearing from local elected officials the last couple of years was, I don't live in that city. I really don't want this situation. There's a couple of people who have gone to the endorsing convention, like they're still a member of their party, but they just aren't wearing that hat as a council
Yeah.
member. There are a couple of them that I know of who have gone to the endorsing interview to tell the people they really shouldn't be endorsing in that race because it is a nonpartisan race and all of that. There are always people who say, well, why don't you just like ban endorsements, like have a law to ban endorsement? Your state, California, tried that in the 1980s and it is unconstitutional. So that's why we don't try that. So that's part of the challenge, just like with legislative candidates and legislative elected officials. You know, you have to figure out what are the incentives for doing something or not doing it.
Well, tell me, what cities are first on the list? Which cities are going to commit to this behavior?
Oh, well, this is the thing. It's done with individuals. So we're not asking necessarily an entire city to organizationally take a position on this. For a lot of them, that would be very awkward to have to do that. And so we're going person by person, and we've got the support groups who they support each other and they trade tips and tricks and, hey, what can we do about this person on our council who keeps doing these really partisan things and doesn't believe that their hat is different and all of those things. So it's really, really relationship based.
I know so many council members who would rather not play the game.
Yeah.
And if they had a good reason, or they could be supported in a way to not play the game, they would.
Yeah.
But
and some are more letting your constituents know. Like, a lot of constituents don't realize that, yes, their state representative is going to have a letter behind their name, but their city councilor, it isn't. And for good reason, because these are nonpartisan offices and these are partisan offices.
Yeah. It's almost, it's even more interesting that an individual at any level could not want to aspire to take a philosophical, more centrist approach to things, right? Because you think like you've got all these groups and we're the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and they were like, go blue and whatever, whatever it is. Like, and then you're like, don't you see, there's polarization and you're playing into it. Like people know, but they choose to continue to do it for money, power. Maybe they're really strong on like one issue that they just can't get over.
Right. Or they just... one of the things that really I find comfort in this, and as I was looking at division and all these, just like, what are the basics of division? One of the things that we do, like, we divide because we're human. It is part of our genetic code to put people in groups and out groups. Are you with me, or are you them? Are you us, or are you them? And that makes a difference when you're talking about, being in a political party or not. One of the things that we're doing with the support groups is reminding people they are not alone. It's not them versus me.
Right.
It's them versus us.
Right.
Us isn't always as visible in some of these situations. So that's it. That's a really fun thing to get to do.
All right. Well, tell me, what do you want people to know about Majority in the Middle, and how do they get in touch with you? How do they sign up? How do they join? How do they lead in the movement that you are creating here?
Awesome. One of the questions that we get a lot is, are you just Minnesota? And we are just Minnesota right now. That being said, our goal is to take what we learn in Minnesota and be able to replicate it in other places. So if you are interested and you do not live in Minnesota, still sign up anyway, because maybe eventually we will get there. So our website is majoritymiddle.org, not majoryinthemiddle.org. I don't know who owns that. I want to steal it from them as soon as I can, but I don't want to ask them if I can buy it, because then they'll think it's a thing. So anyway, majoritymiddle.org. We suggest the first thing you do is sign up for the newsletter. We only send like 3 a month. That gives you a little view into what we're doing and who we are and that kind of thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Shannon Watson, thank you so much. Best of luck on this mission. And I enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. This was fun.
This was good. I will speak to you again soon. Thanks for all the good hard work you're doing.
Thanks, Evan. Appreciate it.